I bought an abandoned train depot for $12,000. Cash, no liens, no disputes, a clean title. 3 weeks later, a letter showed up on my new front door. It didn't come from the county. It came from the Homeowners Association, and it said the building was never really mine. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your last chance. Hit that subscribe button now, because the next story only gets crazier from here. My name's Daniel Reyes, and for 11 years I restored old buildings for a living: gas stations, mills, one waterlogged opera house in Ohio that nearly bankrupted me. But nothing called to me like the depot in Millhaven Junction. It had sat empty since 1987. Cracked platform, rusted rail spur, a ticket window still holding a faded schedule from a railroad that didn't exist anymore. The county listed it as surplus property, and when I saw the auction notice, I knew. I flew out, walked the tracks alone at sunset, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: the itch to save something before it disappeared for good. I won the bid. $12,000. The title search came back spotless. County owned, no easements, no HOA covenants on file. I checked 3 times, because by now I don't trust clean until I've seen it myself. I signed the papers on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had a contractor lined up to shore up the roof. I remember calling my sister that night and telling her, "This one's different. This one's mine, free and clear." I had no idea how wrong that sentence would turn out to be. The letter arrived 9 days after closing. Cream envelope, embossed logo, Millhaven Ridge Homeowners Association. I almost laughed. There was no HOA on my deed. There was no HOA anywhere near the tracks as far as I knew. Inside was a single typed paragraph. It said the depot property falls within the historically designated common area of the Millhaven Ridge community, and that any renovation, demolition, or unauthorized structural alteration required board approval retroactive to the sale. Retroactive, on a building I'd already bought outright from the county. I called the number on the letterhead. A woman named Carol Anners answered, calm as anything, like she'd made this call 100 times before. She told me the depot had been informally maintained by the neighborhood association since the 1990s, that residents considered it shared heritage, and that legally I'd need the board's sign-off before I touched a single brick. I asked her one question: "Do you have a recorded easement or deed restriction?" She paused just a beat too long before answering. "We have our bylaws," she said. That pause told me everything. And nothing. I spent the next week buried in the county recorder's office instead of on the job site. No easement, no restriction, no mention of any HOA in the depot's chain of title, going back to 1954 when the railroad first deeded it to the county. So where did the HOA get its claim? I found the answer by accident, flipping through community newsletters archived at the local library. In 1994, the Millhaven Ridge HO, a HAD without any legal filing, started mowing the depot's overgrown lot and hosting an annual Depot Days festival on the platform. For 30 years, they'd treated it like their own backyard. No permission, no paperwork, just habit, repeated long enough to feel like law. That's when the second letter came. This one wasn't a request, it was a notice of an emergency board meeting, scheduled to vote on community access rights to my property. They'd invited me to attend, as if I needed an invitation to defend something I already owned. I showed up anyway. The meeting room was packed: 40, maybe 50 residents. Carol stood at the front with a poster board timeline of Depot Days photos going back decades. People I'd never met were nodding along like I was the intruder in a story that started long before I arrived. One older man stood up and said something that stuck with me the entire drive home: "Son, that depot raised 3 generations of kids in this town. You don't just get to buy that." I didn't get the vote result that night. I left before it finished, because I already knew what I needed to do: get a real estate attorney who specialized in adverse possession and prescriptive easement claims, because that's exactly what the HOA was quietly trying to build. Here's what most people don't know. In some states, if a group uses a piece of land publicly, continuously, and without permission for long enough, sometimes 10, 15, 20 years, they can actually gain legal rights to it, even without ever holding the deed. It's called a prescriptive easement. And Carol's decades of Depot Days festivals were exactly the kind of long-term open use that could support that argument in court. My attorney, a sharp woman named Priya Ose, pulled every newsletter, every festival permit application, every photo I'd found. And that's where the story cracked open. Every single festival permit for 30 years had been filed with the county under a different name, not the HOAs, but a now defunct nonprofit called the Millhaven Heritage Society. The HOA hadn't been running Depot Days. They'd simply absorbed the tradition after the nonprofit dissolved in 2011 and quietly rewritten the story so it sounded like the HOA's history all along. They didn't have 30 years of use. They had 13. 13 years still worried me. In our state, the threshold for a prescriptive easement claim was exactly 15. They were close enough that a judge might still lean their way if public sentiment ran hot, and after that meeting it was running very hot. Then the HOA played its most aggressive card yet. They filed a temporary restraining order to halt all construction on the depot, citing irreparable harm to community heritage. My contractor's equipment sat idle for 11 straight days while lawyers argued paperwork. Every day of delay was money I didn't have to spare. I'd sunk nearly all my renovation budget into materials already sitting on that platform, exposed to weather. Carol started appearing at town council meetings, painting me as an outsider trying to steal a piece of Millhaven's soul for profit. Local Facebook groups picked it up. I got messages calling me a vulture investor. Even though I'd never flipped a building in my life, every project I'd ever restored, I still owned. The pressure wasn't just legal anymore. It was personal. My own contractor asked if I wanted to just walk away and cut my losses. I almost did. But then Priya found one more document buried in a county archive box, a single onion skin carbon copy that changed everything. It was the original 1954 deed transfer from the railroad to the county. And stapled to the back, nearly disintegrated, was a rider clause explicitly stating the depot and its platform were to remain sole property of the county and its successors in title, exempt from any future community or association claim, in perpetuity. Someone in 1954 had seen this exact fight coming decades before any HOA existed. At the final hearing, Priya read that clause aloud. The judge dismissed the restraining order in under 4 minutes. The HOA's attorney had no response because there wasn't one to give. Carol didn't say a word to me on the way out. She didn't have to. Her poster board timeline sat rolled up under her arm, 30 years of borrowed history that had just been proven 13 and now, legally, worth nothing at all. 6 months later, the depot has a new roof, restored windows, and its original ticket window glass, cleaned and reset in its frame. I invited the town to the reopening, including Carol. She didn't come. But 40 other neighbors did, and this year, Depot Days happened again, on my platform, with my blessing. Because some traditions are worth keeping even after the fight over who owns them is over. But the depot wasn't the strangest property I've ever bought, not even close. Because 2 years before this, I bought a lighthouse at a government auction for $1. And what I found locked inside the light room is the story I'm telling you next. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Want me to update the downloadable file to match this version too?